that act. I would just point out, Mr. Chairman, finally, that yesterday's USA Today front page story, picture, Madam Chairman, of you, Madam Secretary, you and the President of the United States. Yesterday's USA Today headline, "Small Risk of Inflation Swelled to a Global Threat." Underneath, White House waved off economists' warnings, and they quote you from ABC, March of 2021, "Is there a risk of inflation?" You responded, "I think there's a small risk." This is with regard to signing the American Rescue Plan. You say, "and I think it's manageable." Given that, it makes me wonder why Americans should put any confidence in your pronouncements and decisions and recommendations today.
Democrats are claiming that Republicans are trying to raise taxes. Nothing could be further from the truth, when the reality is that as we speak, the Democrats are trying to negotiate a new massive plan that would raise taxes significantly. Do you believe that it would be prudent fiscal policy to increase taxes or engage in more stimulus spending with an economy facing the prospects of stagflation?
I believe there's a lot that Congress can do to ease the cost burdens that households are experiencing. With respect to energy, the administration has done everything that they can to bring down energy costs, for example, through an historic release of 1 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and investing in clean energy and renewables that would free our dependence on global oil markets, asking high-income taxpayers and corporations to pay their fair share is the right way to finance those investments.
No, what I heard you say is that it is okay to raise taxes right now and that it is proper to have more stimulus spending to deal with this crisis. I just have to say I disagree with you on that.
I can't remember that you've said anything about corporate greed being a cause of inflation, but several members of your political party have, and yet we have mainstream Democratic congressmen or economists reject the greed theory. Jason Furman called it a sideshow. Larry Summers said it was a diversionary. Benjamin Page said it was a red herring, and Catherine Rampel for the Washington Post referred to it as an inflation conspiracy theory. What is your opinion? Does corporate greed explain the broad-based price increases consumers are currently facing?
Well, I guess I see the bulk of inflation as reflecting demand and supply factors.
I think
those are, to me, the
you're
key
answering
factors.
the question in a way that I'm glad you answered it, because I think that your answer rejects the corporate greed argument that we've been hearing.
You continue to believe that the President's policies with regard to reducing our capacities to develop our own oil and gas reserves and potential is the appropriate approach to this? You mentioned taking from our strategic petroleum reserves, which I think weakens us, but you didn't mention increasing our domestic production of energy.
They're sitting on thousands of leases on federal lands that they have not yet drilled, and certainly can do so.
But the permits for proceeding on those leases are not being facilitated. I mean, the President's executive orders have shut down the Extel pipeline. They have stopped the issuance of more leases. They've stopped the progress on the permitting of those leases, stopped the offshore oil production. The fact is we were energy independent, and now we are not, and it's not the result of the failure of our capacity.
You know, we may be energy independent, and we're actually exporting oil, but we're part of global oil markets. And look, over the medium term, the critical thing is that we become more dependent on the wind and the sun that are not subject to geopolitical influences, and passing clean energy credits that will boost non-renewables is, I think, really critical to addressing climate change and our energy costs for households
Well,
going
Madam Secretary,
forward.
my time has expired, but
Concern with the current focus on so-called corporate greed is that it risks taking us down the failed roads of the 1970s, where we had price controls and windfall profit taxes. These policies led to rampant shortages, most notably gas lines around the block. Do you agree that neither price controls nor windfall profit tax are viable solutions to inflation and would have serious negative consequences?
Having active competition in markets, I think, is critical to innovation and to consumer well-being.
I think I take your answer as, with all the reasons you've given, that you're not advocating or thinking that price controls or wind profits taxes would have anything to do with fighting inflation.
And a few weeks ago, we had the Interior Secretary testifying before the Energy Committee. I asked her if she thought that gas prices were too high. She could not come up with didn't think it was an easy question, couldn't come up with an answer. Of course they're too high. But I ask you, do you think that gas prices are too high?
Absolutely.
Thank you. The people of Wyoming, the vast majority of Americans agree with you on that point. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? Well, in your fiscal year budget and revenue proposals, as part of the proposed tax hikes, you specifically target U.S. energy production with tax hikes. On top of your tax hikes, the administration is doing everything it can to end oil and gas exploration and production on federal lands. Just last week, the administration announced a sue and settle agreement with environmental extremists, which calls into question millions of acres of oil and natural gas leases in the West, including 2,000 leases, specific leases in my home state of Wyoming. Some of these leases have been let 2015 all the way up through the end of the last administration. The president had his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, talked about gas prices, said, well, we need to take every practical step to make things more affordable. But it seems to me tax hikes and other decisions like this are not going to help and are actually going to make matters worse. Making it more expensive to produce American energy would simply lead to higher prices for consumers. And once that energy is produced, it needs to be transported to refineries and eventually to gas stations. Well, pipelines are an important piece of that transportation. But on CNBC last week, you specifically suggested pipelines don't matter. On one hand, both you and the president say gas prices are too high, to which I agree. But on the other, you are targeting American energy with taxes, and that's going to result in higher costs for Americans. So since you agree the prices are too high, can you please explain the inconsistencies with the policies of the Department of Treasury and the administration?
Well, I would say that as a medium-term matter, the way to reduce energy prices for Americans is to promote credits, energy policy that boosts the production of renewables. I believe that producers are sitting on 37 million acres of land under lease from which they can drill and produce additional oil.
Well, I would point out that in addition to the leases, you actually need a permission to drill, and this administration has blocked all of that. And this sue and settle agreement by the administration last week is taking many of those acres that you just described and freezing those so they cannot be used. And with $5 gas, what we see today is the president calling on using the Defense Production Act, not to go after this, but to build solar panels. And that seems to me the wrong place to be using